Testing, testing.
Testing.
Whoop. There we go. Apparently I didn't press the button hard enough. Thank you, Mr. Bobby Tables. All right. So, Gatsby source Airtable for those. Thanks for the welcome back. Yeah, it's been a handful of weeks. I tell you. 2 months really. In 2 months, yeah, I can see it. Yeah, I tell you, life gets in the way. New Airtable users. Okay. So Airtable is sort of like a spreadsheet. I'm going to just open it up on the side here in case I need to put in credentials. The thing that I use it for most is I actually put my recipes in here. So it operates sort of like a spreadsheet with extra stuff on top of it. It is almost like if you put a GUI on top of a database, for anybody that understands how databases work. It will let you create all these different fields, and you can do things like attach images and text and other types of fields. How do you add a field in again? I gotta make the window smaller so I can hide this. So if I scroll over far enough, you can add extra or new rows, new columns in this, and each column you assign a type of data that you put in it. So if you're familiar with spreadsheets, it feels very much like that. There's a couple different products out in the market that are similar to this, but I've gotten into Airtable and they seem to have a pretty solid API, which is what we are using to do the plugin. It uses a let's see if I get it on the first time. Airtable. Nope. It uses a library that Airtable made. Of which we should probably upgrade the version as well, since we're still on version 0.7, I believe. But when we get in information from Airtable, it comes in basically just a big JSON blob, and that means that it isn't as structured. Oh, there's a cat. It isn't quite as structured as something like WordPress or one of the other CMSs. So it acts a little bit more like, I haven't used it, but I assume it acts a little bit more like the GraphQL plugin that Gatsby has, where you are expecting any type of data and you kind of have to rely on the user to tell them what kind of, or tell the plugin what kind of data that you're working with. So what we have so far is, let's go ahead and open up some code. Good afternoon. Thanks for stopping by. This is some Rust stuff. Just starting to get into that. Cat is being yes, cat. Yes, I don't give you enough attention. Here we go. Workspace. Hey, Denjel. You saw the random Atari stuff there? So another project that I've been spending some time on is, actually let's put this on the other monitor. There's a project called Tari, and it is basically seeking to be a replacement of Electron. Okay, kitty. And that's written in Rust, and that is I've always sort of wanted to get into Rust, and that has been sort of this kitty sort of prompted my start into it. Okay, now that we're all set up. Gatsby source Airtable. So this is the code that we are working with. For the most part, everything is done with this Gatsby node, JS. And we will pull in the data. So we are using the Airtable library directly. And we pull in all of the data. Clean it up a little bit, and then we sort through and push it into nodes, which is done with this create node function. So the issue that we were running into and that has prompted this is when we are creating the node, we originally created it just by naming it Airtable. And this has been edited slightly, so we've got some stuff here. But the original code just used Airtable, which worked fine, but it meant that if Gatsby has a node, it sets the data type for that node or those fields. And if you have multiple, in the build process, it will infer the type of data that it's using. If you give it more than one type of data, then it's going to make some inference and break potentially. So for most use cases, this how we originally did it with just one type worked fine. But now people are starting to use the plugin for more advanced use cases, in which case we have potentially multiple types of data. And then specifically in the case that came up and prompted my looking into it was, oh, thanks, Dr. Michaela. Hopefully your stream went well. Nice. Welcome. Oh my goodness, cat. All right, we are gonna go outside. All right, that cat is very needy sometimes. Okay. So we were getting conflicting data types, and this repository right now is effectively a monorepo with an examples folder. So we can take a look at that right now. One of the examples, probably in the config, I guess. So in the config, we, like most of the other Gatsby plugins, we reference the plugin name, and then we can pass it options. So you can see here that we are passing it a few options. And one of the options that we can pass is a mapping, and that lets us specify names from our table and give it a type of data. And then rather than relying on Gatsby to infer what type of data it is, we are essentially telling Gatsby this is the type of data, use that. And that works well if you only have one type of data that you're mapping to. So originally, we were just pulling in the list of ingredients and the name and the directions all as just text, essentially. So we weren't doing any special mapping, and the only special mapping that we were doing for this example was to bring in images, of which we are calling it a file node, which is sort of a special name. And now if we want to call or use ingredients and use the directions as markdown, we now have a second type of mapping, and that breaks things because we only have one. Technically, we have two types of data or two data types in our Airtable plugin. We have the top level so we have a top level node that we create, and then we have the children, the children nodes, I guess you would say. So here you can see type Airtable. And if somebody enters in data into that mapping property, then when we pull that in, in this process data, we also create children nodes that reference this parent node. And you can see that process is happening right here. So in creating those, we use a field or a data type called Airtable field. So essentially we have two types as far as Gatsby is concerned. But now if we enter in more than one type in that mapping field, Airtable field will start clashing, and that's the issue that we were running into. So if we would, I don't know if I want to necessarily switch this example, but we probably want to have an example. So I think what I'll do is I'll copy this example. We are up to date. Let's start off a new branch. Yeah, apparently this was the first free time everybody is getting. I know David had a crazy schedule the last few weeks as well. Okay. So this branch that we have right now is sort of a working branch, and we're going to not squash commit that into the master branch. We will just merge commit that. So we're actually going to make another branch off of this feature branch. So we will call it and primarily we will be doing we'll call it the main node, or I guess parent node. Parent node field. It's been a while since I worked in this. We do not have workspaces set up. So we will learn about, I'm not using WSL. I am actually just using, so this is the Windows, not terminal, but terrible naming, terminal. the new Windows program called Terminal with Git Bash, correct? Yep. And I am also using Starship, and then Fury Code 2. So we need to set up Yarn workspaces first, so we don't have to mess with that. That's what I hear. I think I'm going to wait until WSL2 goes stable, and then I might consider using it. But the things that I do, I tend to want to make sure that it works on Windows. I'm not sure if it's scheduled for anything. I haven't actually been following along very closely on it. Yeah, that Docker support is definitely a... I specifically got a Windows Professional license, so I didn't have to mess around with the Docker stuff, the Docker issues. Okay, Yarn workspaces. Unfortunately, I set this up so seldom that I am going to steal code from my other repository, Gatsby theme. I think it's just a property called workspace is. Yep. Okay. And it is an array, not an object. So the only weird thing is we don't actually have packages in here. So I guess we don't really have a good way to link this. Do we switch this whole thing to be in a packages? And mess with the whole publishing sequence? That sounds like a lot of work. I think we're just going to skip the workspaces for now, so we can potentially get something out today. Otherwise, I'm going to spend the whole stream trying to set up a better dev environment, which is not the goal for today. That's probably going to lock up VS Code. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to cheat and just copy paste. Work out of node modules. It's gross, but it is going to get things done. So we're going to call this actually, you know what? Yeah, we want an example. We'll do it. So let's just go ahead and let's see what version we've got in here. Gatsby. Doesn't say. Oh, that's odd. It didn't. Refresh. It's interesting that it didn't carry over the package JSON. I don't know if anybody uses VS Code on Windows, but I've noticed weird. You do copy and paste kind of stuff in here. It doesn't seem to always operate nicely. So I'm just doing it on the side here now. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. There we go. 4,000 files, or 44,000 files. Gotta love those node modules. Yep. Oh well. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna cheat and we'll edit things in no modules and copy them over. I don't love it, but it'll work. So I think I do have Prettier enabled. So just by hitting save, it will update code. So I think our first commit is just going to be all the Prettier updates, which I'm fine with. It's a pretty standard thing now that I think using it as a default makes sense. Oop. Misclicked. So you're going to see in a minute that I actually sign my commits, and I am a masochist, sadist, whatever. I type in my password every time. For sure. This is pretty much our only file that we work in. So effectively we just did that tells. I type my password in pretty fast. It's double digit at least. Yeah, I've got a YubiKey, but I haven't bothered setting that up. That's the problem. I need to write a post on how I set this stuff up, because in 9 months or a year when I have to set it up again, I'm gonna have to go back and remember how the heck I did it. Okay, still copying. That is fun. Gotta create that content, right? Okay, so we've got this. Let's start looking at what we're gonna have to do here to update. So I needed, for another theme that I was working on, I updated the Airtable field to take a query name or the table name. Oh, wait. So we've got a separate node type, and that is, this is one of those things that, you know how like a legacy code works. You've slowly built it up over time, and now things feel crufty, but it's not worth the effort to go through and update everything. So when we query the data, we basically push it into a big array, and we loop through the array. So we're essentially mashing together our config options with the data that we've queried from Airtable. Man, XKCD. Did I get that right? I always mix up the letter name or the letter order. I read that a lot back in the day. I've got out of the habit, but I really do like their stuff. So one of the reasons that I went with using Airtable is I can do this stuff on my phone, and it's something that is approachable by my wife. So it's not just me being the overlord of the recipes. So I can definitely understand the interest in using just front matter and Markdown. And actually, the recipe theme that I'm working on is the data that it pulls in. You can potentially, I expect the next thing that we're going to add to that theme is to have an option to set front matter and Markdown, pulling in the information from that instead of just using Airtable. Yep, exactly. They can do it collaboratively, which is, I've actually just made the URL public for, because I'm putting on this on my website anyways, so I made the URL public, and we give that out to friends and family instead of having them go to my website, which is kind of weird for friends and family, I guess. But it's actually abstracted already, but I need to clean it up a little bit and then add a couple more options. So most of the effort was done in abstracting the data. So I need the big updates to that are getting it set up to work with the next version of Theme UI. I think that's probably mostly the last thing that I need to do. And then that'll be ready. But it's dependent on actually the alpha version of this plugin, which is why I figured I would tackle this first. Okay, so I think we're done copying things over. We, going back to what we were doing before, we process the data, and that builds up an object for each row. And then we do some mutating in there, but it's all prior to actually creating the node. Because we're essentially dynamically building up the object, which would be more painful to do without mutating. So we're sort of doing local mutations, and then after that it's all immutable. So if we do have a child node, which would be if somebody entered in information into that mapping, the mapping attribute, and we check for local files, which would be if somebody used that file node property, and that will pipe it through the Gatsby source file system function that will download remote files. So that basically will then take that and dump it onto your hard drive. And that's what we do here. Oh. And then the build node is where we actually pipe in all the data into the final object that we'll use to create the child node. See you at Delves if you haven't left already. Okay, so child nodes, build. So here, build node is where we're, for each child node, we run build node. That will dynamically build up a node if we have, dependent on if we have local files or not. And then we are setting the type here based on the mapping, and if we have separate map types set. So the Airtable field is primarily only used with the mapping, and we only need one field type per, or we only need one type of node per data type. So if we have multiple nodes or pieces of data that are going to be marked down, we only need to have one Airtable field marked down. So that'll cut down on the duplicate nodes a little bit. So I think our child node stuff is fine, which is what we're using in that Airtable, or in the Gatsby's theme recipes. Because we are using both Markdown and images in that theme. But the other thing that we need to add is in this top level, we want to have this configurable as well. And we don't want to have that as a default, because if somebody that would essentially create a breaking change potentially. So it's going to be opt-in, similar to how we have. Let's see if we've documented actually, because as we're talking we can write down how to do it. So we have not. So these are the things you can fill in. We have or expect a field called separate map types. And that is on the I believe that's configured on each table. Separate map types. Apparently we have it in there twice, which feels like a mistake. That's interesting that it's in there twice. Let's go on GitHub real quick, wherever I tossed it. What do we have in the original code? So we have a query name, default values, mapping, and table links. But now we've got separate map types in there twice. And I bet you that is because, so there was prior work done. Yep, actually let's go here. Let's look at our commit history for this branch. So in this PR we started adding things. And that's where we added the separate node type. So why did I add it in there twice? Keep going the wrong way here. So we've got, separate map types, separate node types. So it looks like a copy and paste issue. So the idea was that separate node type would be, I believe it's going to be that one. We might need to check that. But we want a separate node type, which would be the parent node, and then we need a separate map type, which would be the child node. So it'll be opt-in for both of them. Potentially you can, in the next major, we could potentially have that as a default, but turn it on as a default. So when we bring in, see here we've got a separate node type. So we're building up an array. Table options are, so query all is our data. Table options are we're basically just pushing in the options from Gatsby config, so everything is next to each other when we're looping through, and we don't need to deal with any closures or anything, which started out to be fine. Now it's starting to become a bear to deal with. But so node type, separate node type, it's there and there. So in our documentation, that is going to live on, so we've got API key, tables, and concurrency. So that's going to be part of tables. So each table will have table options, table name. Yeah. So here we're looping through all the tables. And a table is equivalent to, other monitor. Each one of these are tables. So in table. It's a good thing your name isn't Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice. So each one of these is a Robert Tables. And we can well, we can't test that rumor right now because you're here. But I'll have to try it next time I'm streaming. Come for the code, stay for the terrible jokes. I think I've said that on previous streams. So config, that's what I want to look at. Here, we'll look at this one. So we're doing the mapping, we're doing the table links, and tables is an array, and in that array we specify the base ID. So you could potentially, so this whole thing that we're looking at here below, that's a base. Within a base, we have tables. So that's each one of these little tab things here. And then on each table, we can specify some additional information like the query name and the mapping. And table links is essentially setting up relationships between tables. So in here, we have two fields called the style and the cooking method. And these are a special column type in Airtable that will link to other tables. So style links to this one. So when we pull down the information, we will get an ID reference rather than the actual data. So the table links will let us, we can specify multiple tables, and the table links will let us link those together in the Gatsby environment. So back to this. So this plugin will expect this as a Boolean. Guess again. We'll say Boolean default is false, comma. So if somebody wants to opt into these new features, they're going to go into each of their tables and specify true. Yeah, we'll put the comment, put the comment there. Boolean default is false, I think we might talk about this a little bit further down. Deep linking across tables. So this is the links to record, is that special field type in Airtable that I was talking about. So using Markdown and attachments, we can probably add that information here. Here's that note about the file node. If you are specifying more than one type of mapping, you may potentially, thank you Grammarly, doesn't fix it though, does it? Just tells me I can't spell. Oh, here we go. I potentially have I have potentially spelled potentially wrong. Quick fix. Is that it? There we go. Nifty. You may potentially allegedly. Potentially I have allegedly spelled potentially wrong, potentially. You may potentially run into issues with data types clashing and throwing errors. And that you may specify is that thing that we just pasted up there, which will create a node type for, let's say, Gatsby node type for each type of data. This should prevent issues with your data types clashing. Does that make sense? So we're going to say, we'll reference this section up here, separate map types. See the documentation on using Markdown and attachments for more information. So I think that covers that. The create separate node type. We are doing that because what was the use case again? Let's see if we can go to this. I just want to make sure that we are speaking to the issues that had originally come up. So the issue here is that you can potentially have, well, when we pull in information from Airtable, we're providing a flattened version of the bases. So if somebody has multiple bases, of which that has multiple tables, you can have tables of which have the same name. So when you're querying, it can potentially become confusing which table you are actually pulling information from. So one of the things we were talking about was having a field prefix, but we're actually opting to go with so this was one thing that we had talked about, but then that means you need to have all of your fields prefixed with that name. So the other option was having a suffix, which is what we are opting to choose to do. You can see this has been out there for a while, right? So the other thing too is that now going this direction, if you're not using the mapping and you're completely relying on Gatsby to do all the inferring of your data types, you can enable or specify this option as true to add a suffix, and then you'll have two different Airtable types, of which that should potentially minimize your potential to have data types clash. So where should we put that in here? So we speak to it a little bit here. And here is where we're saying that you can potentially have issues where you can't tell them apart. So one of the things that we had was optionally a query name. So the next level up from there is if you would like to have the query names for tables be different from the default all Airtable or Airtable, then you may specify that field as true. And that's right here. See the information on naming conflicts. See the documentation on naming conflicts for more information. Okay. So when they specify that as true, then it will change the suffix. And how are we going to determine what the suffix will be? So there is this query name that we use, I think we had decided on let's see if I say anything in this. I think we had decided on basically using that query name. And taking that and essentially suffixing our all Airtable. I think that's the thing that makes the most sense. Because we might as well just keep using the query name. Oh, spelling mistake. Optionally. Apparently I have issues spelling things with ly. Allegedly. Table name, table view. So table view is you specify the name of the table, which would be, in this case, would be recipes. The view is this, and that basically lets you do filtering or grouping or different layouts. So this gallery type actually lays it out in kind of a card format. And the value of that is that somebody can create a view that only shows specific things, like say you want to have a list of good recipes, but you also want to have in your main list recipes that you are trying or slowly modifying to how you like it, and until that point you don't want to actually publish it anywhere. You can create a view that excludes those that you don't want to publish. So somebody can enter in a view with data that is some fraction of the full amount of data that's actually in that table. And there's also sorting, but the sorting mechanism works oddly when coupled with the Gatsby node creation stuff. Since the sort is not really that was one of the other potential updates that we can do to this library is when your data is pulled in, there is row IDs. So you can see on the left here we've got row numbers. We can potentially push that into the data, and you can use that for sorting. Otherwise, the default sort is just going to be based on when the node was created, which if a node has images, or some of these images are bigger than other images, they're not necessarily going to be created as nodes in this order. So there's not a great way to sort it exactly how you're seeing in Airtable right now, depending on how your information is set up. So we're at almost an hour. We might be able to get this done. So I think it makes sense to only use this query name. So when we're looping through and creating the nodes, we map. So this is a Bluebeam or a Bluebird function that lets us set a concurrency, because we were having issues with the speed of the nodes being created depending on how fast the downloads were being done for file nodes. And if we query too fast, we actually will hit the rate limits in Airtable. So we map over and we use the row.fields. So all we need to do really is edit our top level here, And it's going to be very similar to what we're doing over here, where excuse me, right here. So we can pretty much just copy this. Clean type is just a little function that shows up down here, and small amount of regex that will remove special characters, essentially. Special characters and spaces, because it doesn't make sense for somebody to name their table without spaces or in consideration of characters that have trouble being escaped. So we just take care of it in the plugin. Okay, so it will basically be this, except we're going to do Airtable. It's not going to be separate map types, it is going to be separate node type. If that's false, then we don't suffix anything, and if it isn't, if this is true, then we clean it up and we put the query name on there. Oop. Sometimes my control key doesn't work very well, so you might occasionally see random C's pop up because I hit Control C and the control doesn't work. Okay. So I think that's pretty much all that we need to do as far as updating code. Now we need to test, because if we don't test, it's probably broken. I think our documentation is probably good. Or good enough. So let's go ahead and get that committed. And then we will work on the example, and that's basically going to act as our where do we gotta go this way? It's going to act as our essentially integration test. Add separate node type option. Okay, now we need to, oh, did we not save? Shoot. What did we forget to save? Close. Close. Oh, spelling mistake. Okay. Now our new example. We need to edit it for the new mapping. And we're going to add in a query name and so the field that comes in is called, let's get things installed, cd examples I think it's the same as my other recipes one. We'll hope so, and if not, it's gonna break. My Airtable API key. I'm gonna actually use so locally I've got that one set up. I think that's the right one, but we'll find out if I'm wrong. I think I have them capitalized. Ingredients. And directions, we both want to be marked on. And I believe that's text / markdown. And we want to, let's look at our documentation again. We want to enable both of those new things. So the idea behind this example is if we are adding features in the future, then we want this to break. If we want this build to break if we accidentally break something in our code. Of which, depending on queries that expect this to be called all Airtable recipes with these special field types, will break a build. And that's sort of the cheeky way to test without having unit tests. It's probably gotten better, but originally when I first wrote this, the story behind unit tests was not great. Oop. So now this is, we just did yarn install. That is just using to have, let's see. No, I do not. Don't you love this command? Git bash, copy on git bash. Is that CP? Yes, okay. So, whoop, I'm doing CD, CP. Oh, help. We'll get it right. Ah, man, can you tell CD is such a habit? Okay, there we go. Okay, CP, we give it a source destination. So wait, source and then the destination. Okay. So if we just say copy the file that is up, it's operating from this, so it would be up one level into examples, up another into the main repo, so that, and Gatsby node.js, and our destination will be in node modules. And then the other thing I want to do too is add check sets to this, or change sets, excuse me. And I think when I do that, I'll probably set this up as a monorepo, or like a true monorepo where this is in a package folder. Then I won't have to mess around with this, but that's going to go into node modules /Gatsby source Airtable. This is gross, but it works. And when we publish, we're going to publish as a alpha build anyways, so we'll know if we broke something. So we should be able to do that now. Whoop, yarn lazy. There we go. And after we do that, we want to then yarn and dev hard. Of which I don't need to do the clean anymore. Yarn Gatsby clean. There we go. So this will copy it over and we'll run dev hard first, of which it will run a Gatsby clean prior to running develop, which will clean out any of the cache stuff. And that will, especially when you're working on node related changes, sometimes the caching really bites you. So we are getting an error, of which all right, we don't need to keep running. Let's make sure that we are on the latest Gatsby. I don't think that is. Yeah, I don't think that is. Let's well, that's fine. This is a new folder. So we'll just do yarn upgrade interactive dash latest. Let's just get on in their stuff and make sure it works there. That's interesting that cannot query field. Okay, so this is actually when I was saying that things would break. This is actually an expected break because we are currently querying for all Airtable. Thanks, Ryan Warner. Have a good rest of your day. So we need to update our queries for our new query type. So that is the type of error that we do want to see. This one further up, as it's doing this crazy scrolling, this is a little bit more surprising. Clean type map source. So something is going on with this clean type. 367. So, key and data, clean type. Oh, that's interesting. So what is mapping in this case here? Mapping is, it is the actual key, I think. So this data isn't even used. Just hold on. Yep. Okay. Let's go ahead and run that again. just to see if any of our errors changed. I did see a build breaking the other day. It could be that Gatsby updated something that broke one of our assumptions. Suppose we can just let it run actually. Let's go to the GraphQL localhost GraphQL. Did I kill it? Nope, it's still going. Good. So it's airing out pretty good. Okay, that's definitely a better error. Cannot read property replacement of undefined. So our key is undefined. So we might have flip-flopped those. Okay, so if row separate node type, that, otherwise we want to do row query name. I guess that expects you to have a query name. So if that is actually undefined, then I think what we'll do here is return so if key is not defined, then we're just going to return an empty string, otherwise we're going to do the replace thing. So I think that'll cover us in the off chance that they haven't actually entered in a query name. And let's go ahead and update. So our config now says that we want a separate, whoop, that is part of the reason. Okay, so we entered in the wrong config value. So that separate node type is false right now. Separate node type. And I guess while I'm looking at this, is that plural? Separate map types. I don't know if I like the plural versus not plural. I think I'm gonna have everything be singular to keep it consistent. So this should be that. We're just gonna leave that in there for right now because we want it to break. So we can make sure to deal with it not being filled in. And let's update our README real quick to make sure that we have everything as singular. So right now we should not be getting a new node type. Separate map type. So just because I know how this one is doing its queries, it doesn't have queries to specific Airtable fields. So it should just work if we do not have. Oh. Let's make sure we get rid of all these S's. It should just work if we. Oh my goodness. Good thing I'm checking this. This is also why we test. Okay. So if somebody doesn't, or if we're not specifying the separate node type, it's going to come in as default as false, which, yep, is happening here. So we can expect it to be a Boolean at that point. We don't have to deal with it being undefined. So row separate node type. So I don't like doing that, but okay. We'll get rid of this because double negatives are hard to deal with mentally. Separate node type. If that is true, then we want to do that. Otherwise, we just want to do an empty string. I'm going to switch this around too, actually. Yeah. So now that should basically read that if we're using separate map types, then we're going to use the clean type version of mapping. Otherwise, we're just going to do an empty string, which would be basically suffixing the Airtable field with nothing. And here, if we have a separate node type, we're going to use the clean type, otherwise we're going to use nothing. So that should be fine. And I would expect that to not fail anything. So our queries should theoretically go through just fine. I think I am going to actually clean up this. So we have this warning in here. We used to not clean up keys, but then we had some inconsistency and it was difficult to deal with. So that shows up in the code here, and basically we're saying that we need to enter in the cleaned version, which means we should be putting in the cooking method like that. So I believe that'll remove that error. Okay, so the field types seems to be working. And what that's saying now is we had a field of which we expected it just to be text, but now it's actually referencing a new node called this. And I'm not a big fan of that non-capitalized stuff, but so it's saying actually now this is referring to a node. Do you mean to specify data from that node? So that would be the error that I expect to see. And it looks like we're getting the same here. So if we update our queries to use that instead, actually this should open up now. Here, so we can see now we have an all Airtable, and we get a special node for each type, a file node and a text markdown. So if we look into the nodes, data, now you can see we've got the nodes that we expected here. And I think I feel like this was changed and it doesn't actually like link the children anymore, which I feel like is kind of weird. Okay, so we've got some mixing of types going on here, which probably is not helping out. So we know, and this is part of the issue that we are sort of looking to help resolve. So some of this is purely functional, where we can only get it to work if we add these features in, and some of it is more just developer, make the developer's life more be more friendly to that. So in the text markdown we have parent. We are setting the type correctly, right? Type. Let's do that. What do we have? Okay, so it's setting the type as that. So we actually want to set the, here, media type. This is what we want. Yeah, so that should be text markdown. I might have the wrong media type, which is why that's not working. Let's look at, it's on this. It was on the right screen. Let's look at our Gatsby theme, or theme recipes. And our example. And it is text markdown. Text/markdown. So when we did do text/markdown, so that's right. So our media type is right. So it's kind of surprising that we're not getting, I bet you we don't have, do we have any markdown plugins? So that's the difference. We don't have any markdown plugins added. So to get that to come through, we need to add a plugin. So when we put up a type node, we need another plugin to also take that node and do data transformations on it. And I believe we just need to add, I think we'll do MDX for this one, because the other one I believe uses Remark. So let's just check to make sure we're getting all the prerequisites for this plugin. I'm not going to bother with styling at all, so I'm just going to pull in all the default things here and yarn add those. And then in here we will need to do Gatsby plugin MDX, and that should take care of our transforming the nodes that are of type text / markdown into actual MDX nodes. And that will mean that we then get more information than just this raw data. So another thing that we do need to do is I do want to change this. Right now this is just a console.time, and I'd like to change that to something that Gatsby picks up. So just to make sure, let's go ahead and refresh. Now we should be getting child MDX. There we go. So this will give us let's do raw body, I think. So this will give us, this was all the nodes that I was expecting to see before. So now we've got the child MDX. We can then, on a node, we will, on an Airtable node, we will have a child MDX and a raw body. And then if we update our queries to point to that instead, we should, that group, go, I think edges is what we're using in the other one. Data, directions, child MDX, and raw body. And here I'm just using the raw body because it's an easy thing to query for, and I don't need to, I just need to have the query fail if it doesn't exist. I'm pretty sure this is rather ugly at this point, where we don't have any real styling on any of these examples anyways, so it's not the end of the world if we're just using the raw body. Okay, so that's interesting. Gatsby plugin sharp wasn't set up correctly. I wonder if I need to add that into the array. Well, let's look back at, where did I put it? Here. I guess we do have to have plugin sharp in there. There we go. Okay, added. That looks like less errors than we had before. Okay. So we should have, did it actually finish without any errors? Oh. Interesting. That looks like a sharp error. And I guess the reason I'm thinking that is it placeholder is a PNG. So it's either the to Gatsby. Yeah, it's just failing to copy something. So that actually might be the source plugin. I'm not quite sure. But I don't think that's an issue with our code, so we will ignore it for now. Let's just see what things are looking like. Okay, so we will update our template real quick just to make sure that that's coming through correct. So we did in here, right now we're just looping over a text string. So what we're actually going to do now is child mdx.raw body, and I think it should be exactly the same as we had before. I wouldn't recommend doing this on an actual site because there's really not a need to do it with the MDX ecosystem. But it looks like we are working correctly. Okay, so now the next step is if we would happen to enable this separate node type, then we expect this to fail. And then if it does fail when we're running this in our CI in the repo, then it will kind of let us know if something went wrong with our code. If Gatsby changed something or we changed something in the future and it breaks this. So nothing broke, which means I'm expecting this to be interesting. Oh, I do not have a query name set. So query name should be recipes as well. And I think what we're going to do is if somebody enters in separate node type but no query name, we are going to just let them know. So here we're doing a console.warn. What did that look like before? Let's scroll up a bunch. Should we keep using that console.warn? Warn. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So we'll use that again. So we'll say here, if row.separate node type, so if that's true, and row dot query name. Do we set a default for that? I don't remember if we do. So we don't, so it'll be undefined. So we can say, and row.query name row dot equals nothing. So just an empty text string, because that'll effectively be the same as if it was undefined. So in that case, we want to do a console.warn, right? Yep, console.warn. Why is it not coloring it? Oh, forgot my closing parenthesis. There we go. Console.warn. You have opted into separate node types, but not specified a query name. We use the query name to suffix the node type. Without a query name, it will act like separate node type is false. Guess I will do this. Okay. So if somebody screws up like we did, now hopefully that will save them. We're gonna just run this one more time with it broken to see our error, and then we will rerun without the with our config being correct, and then that should mean we are almost done. Interesting. Separate node type. Separate node type. Row.query name. We did not see the warning, so what are we missing? We're still getting that random error, which is weird. So if separate node type, here, what we will do is we're just gonna log this whole sucker. Console.log. There we go. False, true, false. So why is it false? Are we missing something? Further up, that is... So if table options that create separate... Oh, it's create. And separate map type. So it is, this is actually create here. So we're going to call it separate node type. I think that makes sense. I don't feel like having create there adds any value. Here we go. Okay. That's kind of funny. We probably don't need to warn that much, but that's the easiest way to do it, and I don't suspect anybody's gonna keep that specific configuration, or they'll keep getting that error. Okay. So we are getting cannot query field ingredients and type Airtable data, which is the error that we were expecting to see. So we are on the right path. Yeah. So this should break our build. I guess let's just check. If we do, come on, yarn build, it should break our build. Of which case, when we are running this in our CI, we'll know if we run into an error, because this is going to happen. So I think we are set. Now, if we update our query to point to Airtable recipes, it should pass. So I'm going to assume that we have 20. Yep. I got updated in a couple places. Airtable recipes. I think we don't really do much else. So this just lists all the pages. Yep. I think it'll just be those two spots. I was wrong. Cannot query fields on type. Oh. So I bet you in Gatsby node we are looking for the Airtable type, of which we don't have one anymore. It will be called Airtable recipes. So this little function here, when a node is created, if a node is of internal dot type Airtable recipes, then it will create a field on that node called slug. So that is a way to take the name of the, in this case of the recipe, and convert it into something that can be a URL, used as a URL. Let's search for make sure we're not Markdown docs recipe with multi-type. Okay, so we've got those. Hopefully that's it. There we go. Looks like it's going through. So on our template, we've got an Airtable recipes. So now this field is actually going to be called our Airtable recipes. So the difference between Gatsby build and Gatsby develop, Gatsby develop basically boots up a little server that you can use, and when you click around, if you click to a page that has an error, it will throw an error. But just because Gatsby build goes through doesn't necessarily mean that that you have no errors. But Gatsby build actually has to go through and build every page, and he essentially will touch every page and surface any errors that you have. So if you are running a Gatsby develop and you're running into random errors that you can't seem to figure out, sometimes it's useful to run Gatsby build, and that will potentially surface other errors that aren't seen just by clicking around. Okay, so looks like we finished. I think we've got everything covered. I believe this is just a random console.log that we have. Maybe in our template? Let's search for console.log. Yep. So we don't really need that. I'm just going to get rid of that. Okay. So I think we're covered. Let's just go ahead and run this quick. And we could probably start committing some things, and we will run a publish and finish up. We'll probably give it a day or two just to test out in other code bases to make sure we didn't actually goof anything up, and then we will launch this one live under the latest tag. So, and it all finished. So git commit -m add separate node type. Now, we only updated the lock file for this example, but I have Renovate on this repository, so that'll update our npm package.lock or package-lock, whatever they call it. So I'm just not going to bother monkeying with that right now. Let's just double check the README. Yeah, that should be. We'll update the name. Update recipes with photos. It should be recipes with multi-type fields. Commit. Add. Example that will error that errors without new features. And we will go ahead and increment the version. Interesting. I would have expected that to be incremented already. So if we go look at this, Google is getting creepy. So if we look at this, it looks like I must have just changed that. So if we look on npm, we should have an alpha version that's pushed out. Gatsby source. It's a fun number. Looks like we're getting a decent amount of downloads. Yep. So we've got a next tag. I think what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and publish that right away. We will change this to 2.1.0 dash O, or we'll call it beta.o. 2.1.0 dash alpha.o beta.o. Okay. Bump version number and since I don't use the pure npm publish much anymore, npm publish. I can't remember what the tag is. So it is just dash tag. So we want to say, because we have a tag called next, so we want to call our publish, say npm publish dash tag next. So that'll put it under this tag. So when somebody downloads a package from npm, it will by default use latest if you don't specify a specific tag. So if we put it under this next tag, then it will be opt-in for anybody that wants to use it. Oh, that's, you go up a level, up a level, go. Yep. Hopefully it didn't publish anything. There, that looks a lot better. Okay, there we go. So we should see the next version right here. Beta version. There we go. We will give that a little bit, and when we feel that we're ready with this, we will merge everything over and we will do a full publish from master. So I think that probably is good for today. Did anybody have any questions or anything? I'm happy that we were able to get this all covered. So we can go ahead and push git push set upstream origin. Oh, I'm just copying that. Okay. Well, we were able to pretty much get this all finished up. So again, we'll just give it a few more days to make sure that we didn't goof anything up. Sleep on it a little bit, and when we're ready to go, we'll go ahead and publish it. So thanks for stopping by. I hope you learned something, and have a good rest of your Saturday or Sunday if you're on that time zone. See ya.